There have been some globally significant deaths in the world in the last few days. On Thursday, the Queen of Seoul, Aretha Franklin, died. Yesterday, Kofi Annan, the former General Secretary of the United Nations and the Nobel Prize laureate and a graduate of my alma mater, Macalester College, died. When I heard about Aretha's death, I thought to myself, the Queen is dead and she does not have a successor. Usually when a monarch dies, the whole succession thing is really important. It's been said that the primary duty of the spouse of a king is to provide an heir and a spare, which is what Diana did. And so you have my cousins up there, Will and Harry and Diana. They were Spencers, you know. So. We are related, honestly. A little perturbed they didn't invite me to their weddings, but, cousins sometimes. Making sure that there was an heir for David was not a problem. He had many wives, and so he had many offspring. With his impending death in chapter 1 of 1 Kings, a power struggle begins between the various brothers. Solomon is David's pick and is actually crowned before David dies, which I find interesting. Now, our reading picks up with the death of David. I love how delicately it's put in the New Revised Standard Version. David slept with his ancestors. In the Message, David joined his ancestors. So Solomon ascends to the throne, and our reading skips then from those couple chapters about Solomon ascending to the throne to the part that we heard about his dream. And it skips the part about him consolidating power in, let's just say there was blood to clean up afterwards. And it skips the reading about Solomon getting married to one of the daughters of Pharaoh to create an alliance there. We pick up the 1 Kings narrative with stories of how righteous Solomon is. He goes to holy places all around Israel and he offers sacrifices. He's a good guy, especially if you ignore the parts that we skipped in chapters 1 and 2 and 3. But he's a great guy. And he's in one of these holy places in Gibeon, and he offers sacrifices, and he has this dream. And God comes to Solomon in a dream and gives him a life-changing invitation. What should I give you? Solomon begins his answer by acknowledging God's love for his father David, the love that has placed Solomon on his father's throne, so that David's legacy and family line could continue. David describes himself as only a child, perhaps referencing his youthfulness, although his exact age is not known here, or a figure of speech reflecting his sense of the enormity of the responsibility of being king. Then Solomon puts in his requests. So what would you ask for if you had one wish? You'd just been made king. What would you ask for? Solomon asks for wisdom. The way Eugene Peterson puts it in the Message, give me a God-listening heart so I can lead your people well, discerning the difference between good and evil. A God-listening heart. The New Revised Standard Version says, give your servant, therefore, an understanding mind to govern your people, able to discern between good and evil. The New International Version says, a discerning heart. The English Standard Version says, an understanding heart. The American Standard Version says, an understanding mind. Oh, no, I've got those backwards. English Standard, understanding mind. American Standard, understanding heart. Contemporary English Version, make me wise. All of them say he wants to be wise so he can discern between right and wrong, between good and evil. So it's time for a little pop quiz. Who else wanted to be able to discern between good and evil in the Bible? No, I'll give you a hint. Adam and Eve, they wanted to eat the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And they got into trouble for it. And here's Solomon asking for a discerning heart, for the wisdom to be able to discern between good and evil. I think the big difference is Adam and Eve wanted to discern between good and evil so they could be gods. And Solomon wants to know so that he can be an effective servant of God. But more interesting to me than this desire to be able to discern between good and evil is how challenging it is to translate the Hebrew words into English about that wisdom. I think part of the reason is that understanding what wisdom is really takes wisdom. If the issue was knowledge, or even if the issue was intelligence, I think that it would be fairly easy to write about that. If all Solomon wanted was to be smart, that would not be a hard translation to make. But he's talking about wisdom, and it's harder to write about wisdom. We end up writing about the heart, not just the mind. It seems that to understand with wisdom has something to do with feelings. But not just that. Something more. Intuition, perhaps. Sensory input, maybe. Experience, probably. Arianna Huffington wrote a book several years ago entitled Thrive. And I've not read the book, I've only read about the book. But apparently in the book, she outlines what she calls a third metric for measuring success. This is a woman who has plenty of power, plenty of influence in the world, and she says that those aren't accurate measures of success. There's a third metric that she comes up with for measuring success in our culture. Her third metric embraces well-being, wonder, giving, and wisdom. And here's how she defines this third metric. Understanding life as a classroom where we can learn even from our struggles. Practicing and expressing gratitude, paying attention to our intuition and interior life, appreciating the difference between information and wisdom, slowing down in a culture of hurry sickness. I like that term, hurry sickness. Being mindful instead of operating on automatic pilot. I like this list. I know that when I can move from seeing the pains that come in the struggles of life, from just focusing on the pain to focusing on the lesson, my life improves. I know that the practice of looking for reasons to give thanks and then expressing those thanks has grounded me spiritually. I know my life is simply better when I listen to my intuition and when I listen to what my soul is saying to me. That usually requires me to slow down enough that I'm quiet enough and to be intentional enough that I'm quiet enough. You know, I really dislike it when I have something to say and somebody that I'm wanting to express it to won't listen to me, and yet I do that to myself all the time. Having information is powerful, but applying it wisely is even more powerful. As the saying goes, knowledge is knowing that the tomato is a fruit. Wisdom is not putting it in a fruit salad. I already mentioned one of the reasons slowing down is important. It gives me time to listen to myself. Another is that it helps me be aware of the reasons I have to be grateful. Only by slowing down on a walk yesterday to the barber was I able to enjoy these little flowers. And I only noticed them because I was being mindful at least a little bit as I walked through town. April Yamasaki points out the parallels between Huffington's list and Solomon's wisdom. Today's scripture reading also suggests 3 measures of success: riches and honor, neither which he asks for, and wisdom, which he does ask for. For Solomon, wisdom includes gratitude. After he wakes from his dream, he goes and offers more sacrifices in thanksgiving to God. Yamasaki wonders if Solomon were an older and more experienced ruler when God appeared to him in the dream, would he have asked for wisdom? Would he have asked for wisdom if he were not already wealthy and powerful? If Huffington hadn't already been rich and influential, would she have discerned her 3rd metric? What might wisdom mean for us ordinary folk? I've been pondering this question most of the week. And as I've sat with that question, I keep coming back to a memory. An experience that I had when I was about the same age that Solomon was when the scriptures tell us he had this dream. I was about halfway through college, preparing myself to become a math teacher, and it didn't feel quite right to me. I was in worship one Sunday. The scripture reading was from Mark, the healing of Bartimaeus, a person who is blind. Jesus walks through town, and Bartimaeus shouts out to him, and Jesus comes over. Bartimaeus actually, I think, comes over to Jesus. In any event, Jesus says to him, "What do you want me to do for you?" And I left the sanctuary. It was like I was having a lucid dream. I was on those dusty roads. I was seeing what was happening. I was hearing the people speaking. I heard Jesus ask Bartimaeus, "What do you want me to do for you?" And I knew what Bartimaeus was going to say. He was going to ask for his sight back, but I really wanted him to say something else. For all the world, I wanted Bartimaeus to say, "Look, Jesus, what I really want you to do for me is, would you tell Jeff what he's supposed to do with his life?" And he didn't. He asked for his sight back. And I came back to St. Paul, Minnesota, to the wooden pews at St. Paul's United Church of Christ, disappointed, but maybe just a teeny bit wiser. I knew how much I longed for direction, for a clear sense of call. And eventually that clear sense of call came. I'm not sure what to make of this reminiscing about this experience and what that has to do with this question, what might wisdom mean to us ordinary folk? Except maybe that wisdom is relational. There was an intimacy for me in that moment of being on those dusty roads with Jesus and with Bartimaeus. And Solomon certainly has an intensely intimate moment with God in his dream. Maybe wisdom has an ethical dimension to it, regardless of our station. Being able to discern between right and wrong, between good and evil. The specific wisdom that Solomon asks for is only helpful if it leads to action, to a behavior, to right living, to good decision making. And maybe wisdom has an emotional dimension. My trip to the dusty roads of first century Palestine was certainly an emotional experience. And I imagine Solomon's dream left him with deep feelings that he responded to with praise and thanksgiving. When I started making plans for today's sermon about a month ago, I could not help but think about the current political situation in the United States and what seems to me to be a lack of wisdom with our political leaders. I don't think I need to talk about that today. If you feel the need to have that talked about, go right ahead, talk to yourself. I think instead I should conclude with the question that I'm still wrestling with. If God came to you in a dream and offered you one wish, what would you ask for? Would you ask for wisdom? Would you ask for something else that you feel you need to be a servant of God? Or would you ask for something that satisfies you personally, some want you have in life? I will leave you to finish today's sermon.